Thank you very much. Well, let me first say that I'm a total believer in the importance of agriculture for improving human nutrition. Let there be no doubt about that. I also want to point out this topic is not new. I've been involved on and off in it for some 30 years, from the farming systems approaches of the 80s, the nutrition CRISP, and other CRISP projects of USAID, and so on. I really want to address the parts of Patrick's talk, I think mostly, that have to do with areas of measurable impact. How much can we achieve? And I think we've learned quite a lot about the impact of interventions in the last 30 years that might guide us in this area. Generally, Patrick, I really liked your talk a lot, and I'm just going to try to expand and comment on a few areas. So this is a review which by Masset, which Patrick included, which included some of the nutrition outcomes that are often used in agricultural intervention projects. And as he said, other reviews, meta-analyses, have come up with many of the same comments. So what was clear, first of all, is that very few programs measured change in intake, real change in intake. In 13 out of 19 projects, there was an intake, an increase in the intake of the targeted food, but hardly any of them measured whether that actually caused a substitution for other foods in the diet. Another comment I would make is I think dietary diversity can be a very poor measure of outcomes, because you have to eat enough of any of those foods. It doesn't just work to add up the number of foods that you consume. We've seen in studies now that a certain amount of milk or meat or fruit and vegetables is necessary. So just dietary diversity, no. Then there's anthropometric measures. I really want to emphasize to this audience that the anthropometric measures of stunting and underweight are just about the least sensitive outcomes you could possibly try to measure in an agricultural intervention project. It is said that the criticism in these meta-analyses is, well, they didn't have enough children. They didn't have large enough sample size. You need 5,000 children to detect a 10% decrease in stunting or underweight. But turn it around the other way. That means that it's not a sensitive outcome. That's why you need 5,000 to see any effect at all. And this is also true for just supplements, the way you provide all the nutrients that people want. And I'll come back to that in a slide in a moment. Then there are nutritional status measures. That's the third category that's looked at in all these reviews. And there's only effects seen on serum retinol, and that was in 4 of 9 studies. Well, serum retinol is arguably one of the easiest ones to change, because there are food sources high in carotenoids or vitamin A. For all the other foods, they're really not very rich sources of most nutrients. So that's why you might pick up a change in serum retinol. There's no effect on iron intake. That's a difficult one, even with fortification. Effects of zinc are not really measurable in terms of biochemical measures and so on. And so, as I said, there are very few micronutrient-rich foods. So it's a real challenge to see effects on nutritional status indicators. I just include this slide because it's a meta-analysis of all of the effects on growth of different forms of supplementation, including, this is all strategies combined. The pointer's not working on the right. Supplements and food-based complementary feeding approaches. The effect small is tiny. It's about 0.2 overall. So if you're hoping to see a change in growth, even these kind of nutrient interventions don't work. So I'm talking about proximal effects on growth of children. I don't think you're going to see it. Now, on the other hand, we do know that animal source foods improve child growth and development. So we do have some efficacy trials to show that these work. What does work? to change child growth and development. So going back now some 20 years or so, the Nutrition Global Livestock CRISP in Kenya did a milk versus meat intervention study. And they found that meat supplementation, 60 to 80 grams a day, so here's Patrick's request for information on dose, improved all of those outcomes in school children, not just small children, but school children, when it was fed. From 1 year you could see differences, 2 years even more. 1 time a day was school lunch. Milk supplementation, just 1 cup a day, did improve growth of stunted children. And an outcome indicator, milk or meat supplementation, improved B12 status because animal source foods are the only source of this nutrient. This is a meta-analysis of studies giving milk to young children or observations. On the right-hand side, the line there shows that all studies showed that milk improved growth of children. And on the bottom left, you can see 750 milliliters of milk a day caused a 0.4 centimeter increase in height. Yes, foods work better than supplements. Okay, now the approach that the agricultural community seemed to have been using really to improve nutrition is, of course, there was a big emphasis on the left on crops that improve food security, reduced hunger, and so on. And then on the bottom, I've sort of arbitrary lines, but interest in biofortification, has been interest in animal source foods, and has been increasing interest in smallholder agriculture. So that's how the agricultural community in my head sees improving nutrition. This is how the nutrition community works. And Joaquin said, well, how does this fit with supplementation and fortification, everything else that's going on out there? Well, supplementation is huge, but mostly in early life. Fortification, blanketing the world, in my mind, with a lot of things that we don't need and not some of the things we do need, without adequate assessment of what the community needs in the first place. And the latest craze is peanut-based micronutrients in plum peanut and so on. And I'm involved in those. It's not just a craze. But what we have found, that they increase birth weight more than multiple micronutrients. The latest findings last week. So maybe there's something about lipids and birth weight here we didn't understand. And then dietary quality improvement. That's up to you guys in the bottom. The rest of it we're doing, right? So this is what current micronutrient policies and strategies look like. And there's almost nothing earlier on. Breast milk and for babies, nutrient-dense household foods in the middle there for complementary feeding. But nearly always, even the best households couldn't provide those nutrient-dense complementary foods. So we're making up with all those multiple micronutrient interventions. And then on the right, women and children, fortification of staples and biofortification with so far a few nutrients. So this is my model that I want to emphasize, please, to ask you to try and work on a bit. And I'm not the only one saying this, and people are being successful with it. Measure food intake to start with. Measure food intake, measure food intake. The most important thing you can do. And from that, you figure out how many people, third box down, have low intakes or high intakes of each nutrient, particularly low intakes. On the left, I would go next to look for plant sources of the missing nutrients. And those are really energy, vitamins A, C, and folate. For iron and zinc, there are a few exceptions, but not many. Plant sources. And that would include biofortification. There are animal sources, great, full of all sorts of nutrients. The problem in the world is not enough animal source foods, I would say. And I know there are difficulties in producing them. And then third, the fortification and supplements should be filling the gap at the bottom. And programs like OptiFood and our IMAP program can help to do this kind of estimation to see what people need. People need 40 nutrients. They also need all sorts of things in plants, like phytonutrients that we're studying a lot in my center. When will the agenda come up to look at phytonutrients and health and reduced risk of chronic diseases? All right, just one or two examples here of successful, I think, efforts. The ENAM project in Ghana, if you don't know it, was working in 3 zones in Ghana with the global livestock CRISP. And there they did an assessment in the community of what the constraints on animal source food consumption were. A great model for this. And the ones in the orange boxes were the ones that turned out to be most important. Then what they did is this 3-legged approach, which turned out to be extremely successful. Microcredit loans and savings on how to, for fish smoking, food conservation, poultry and eggs. That reminds me that I think poultry and eggs have huge potential, never been evaluated for effects on nutritional outcomes. Education about how to sell and produce and these particular foods. And then thirdly, nutrition education, all reinforced in weekly meetings at which the loans were paid back. The results, 50% reduction in food insecurity, increases in height and weight, and higher intakes of protein, calcium, zinc, and iron. The last one is homestead food production in Bangladesh, by the HKI, a huge project that could scale up, tripled vegetable production, increased income, increased consumption of micronutrient-rich foods, and improved food security. So the last 2 slides, what I would add to Patrick's what we don't know. What strategies are best to improve the dietary quality of the poor, how and why diets are changing with and across households and how to influence it. It would be good to know how longer-term agricultural interventions improve nutritional status and growth. And I think they would if you take the attitude that these are for the whole household. These are for the women who are when they are adolescents, pre-pregnancy, during pregnancy. That's where the impact's going to be made. And then cardiovascular and other chronic disease risk reduction. We know that there can be unintended effects on diet. I've listed some of them. And then best how to integrate these agricultural with other micronutrient interventions. What we do know that I think really has not been taken account of in ag interventions is that few interventions improve growth directly, but animal source foods and especially milk do. Milk is a big deal. It improves growth through increasing IGF levels. It's a whole different ballgame. Growth's an insensitive outcome. Anemia is also an insensitive nutritional status outcome. Maybe we should use some others like breast milk micronutrients. Breast milk quality is very poor in many, many countries in the world. Maybe serum B12 to show effects of animal source food intake. You have to match those outcomes to your intervention. Agriculture should impact the whole household and not just focus on pregnant women and young children. This is the way that the world will improve its food supply. You should plan the interventions to meet the nutrient gaps, otherwise you won't see anything. You should really, really measure well the impact on the whole diet for several household members, not just small children, and then all of these other factors we've learned that help these nutrition and agriculture programs to be more effective. Thank you.